There we go. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Film Fund podcast. I'm your host, founder, and executive producer at the Film Fund, Thomas Verdi. I'm also an award-winning filmmaker, producer, and film festival judge. I started the Film Fund to give filmmakers an easier, alternative way to get their films funded. Instead of working on a screenplay, crowdfunding campaign, or grant application, you write one sentence pitching your film for a chance to receive up to $10,000 and other prizes to make it. Our spring 2022 narrative and documentary funding contests are now closed. So thank you everyone for entering. We just released the winners, so check them out on our social media and our blog soon and our email newsletter. But more importantly, we're opening again for entries in just a couple weeks. When you listen to this episode, we may be open for entries if you're listening at a later date. Check us out at thefilmfund.co to enter your one-sentence pitch for a chance to win up to $10,000 to make your film. And we want to remind listeners that contests do happen regularly. So again, if you're listening at a later date, check the website at thefilmfund.co for the most up-to-date information. Today we have Travis Beard on the show. Travis is a filmmaker making a documentary on North Korea, which is super exciting. He was one of our previous winners from a while back, and we're super excited to have him on the show. Travis, where are you joining us from today? I know you're all over the globe when we're emailing, traveling, working on the film.
I'm currently in Australia. I'm currently in Melbourne, but I live in
okay.
Sydney. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Again, thanks so much for joining. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first I want to say, Thomas, nice to meet you because your face is not on your website, and it's good to see the man behind the machine.
It is on the judges page.
Oh, is
you
it?
Have to click around
I
a little
never
bit.
got to the judges page. I do apologize, but anyway, it's good to see your face.
No worries. Thank you. You as well.
Just a really quick background. I am a self-taught filmmaker. Never studied filmmaking. Actually studied photography. And out of necessity, I started making films. And I think the best way to learn how to make films is to actually make them rather than just to study. Not saying that kids shouldn't go to university. I'm not saying they shouldn't study. I'm not here to say that. But the best way to learn through mistakes and trial and error is to make films. So I made my first film while living in Afghanistan. And I got myself into the film industry that way. And I've been making films ever since. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into the industry.
What brought you to Afghanistan?
I was there first as a journalist in 2001. Americans were coming in from the northeast, and I came in from the southwest, and reported on the refugee exodus, and got what we now refer to as the Afghan bug, which is like an itch sensation that you get from going to such an exotic place like Afghanistan. And I fell in love with the country. Found a way to move back there and ended up living there for 7 years. And I technically still have the Afghan bug because I'm still making films about that beloved but cursed country.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
It's another podcast, basically.
What's that?
It's another podcast.
Yeah. No. So what are some of the highlights about your work? Do you generally find your surroundings influence what you like to tell stories about?
I mean, yeah, for me, I don't find the stories find me, because I travel a lot, and you meet a lot of people, and it's all about people, basically. You just bump into things and you find them. I don't think I've ever written a script or pitched a film idea without having something already in the making. And that's just the way it is in my world. Some people can conceive things and then go off and chase it. I just find things and go, hey, that looks cool. Let's make a film out of it. And that's just the way my creative process works. And it seems to work, so I'm going to keep doing that.
Mm-hmm. And now, do you solely do documentary work, or do you do narrative as well?
No, solely do documentary. Unfortunately, I'm really crap at narrative. The occasional bread and butter. I might jump on a crew for something like that, but my own creative process, no. But in the music world, because I also make music, I guess that is more.
Oh, cool.
Is more narrative and less of the documentary side. But I mean, look, yeah, another podcast in itself. But in the film world, I stick to.
Yeah, I was about to say that too. We got lots of podcasts.
Too many podcasts. But I try to stick to documentary and do that as best as I can.
Very cool. And what are, I guess, some of the highlights about your documentary work, or some things you usually like to focus on?
I mean, the human
once the story
condition,
finds you?
and the challenges of living in this world we live in, and particularly being the underdog. And that comes from living in what some people used to call the third world. Now, not use that. We could call it the developing world. We can't use that now. I've heard people call it the global south. I don't really get that term because I'm in Australia. We are in the south, but we're not part of the global south.
Yeah.
So the emerging democracies is
Hmm.
the new
I
term that
haven't
I've
heard
been.
that one. I've heard the developing world, but
Yeah, now even that's
okay.
not kosher anymore. But the new one is the emerging democracies. So people who are aspiring to
Okay.
be democracies, they are the so-called underdogs, the
Gotcha.
countries that are trying to get up with what you would in the past call the first world, which we're not allowed to call that anymore. And so those countries that are trying to sort of get their head above the water, and particularly that is a lot in Asia and the Middle East, obviously South America and
Hmm.
Africa, but I don't have a lot of experience in those two continents. And I particularly like to stick to areas that I have
Hmm.
experience. So the Muslim world, I actually have a lot of experience in. And yeah, that's just where I sort of I do my dance, as we might call it.
Hmm. So you were in Afghanistan for, you said, 7 years.
Yes, long time.
So what brought you? And did you do a documentary about um that as well? You said.
Yeah, so my first documentary, my sort of baptism of fire, was a documentary about Afghanistan's first heavy metal band. And the film was called Rockable.
Heavy metal band. That's so cool. Okay.
Yeah, and they were the first and technically the last in that era. So we had this little period in the occupation slash liberation of Afghanistan by the Americans in the West. We had this little period of about sort of 5 or 6 years where rock, metal, hip hop, and sort of other alternate genres kind of had a bit of a thriving kind of scene. Very small scene. We're talking about less than sort of 15 bands and maybe half a dozen venues. But in
Okay.
Kabul, there was this scene going on which was reminiscent of maybe the punk era of the 1970s, and it was thriving. It really was. And I was lucky enough to be there. I was part of that music scene because I'm a musician, and I happened to have a camera, and
Hmm.
I started recording. And 5 years later, I had a documentary that toured the world and did quite well for a debut in the industry.
I love that. So you were just there in part of that
Yeah.
scene, and you just decided to capture it.
Well, I mean, I was a musician on
Did you
stage, and
plan?
my band
Uh-huh.
had the best equipment out of any bands in the scene. So when the Afghan bands wanted to play, they'd say, "Oh, can we borrow your amplifier? Can we borrow your guitar?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure." So we'd share our equipment. And there was one band in particular, District Unknown, that were in practice the first heavy metal band in Afghanistan, and they were terrible. And so we mentored them, we gave them
Hmm.
instruments, we gave them a practice space. And on that first day of their first session in that practice room, I just grabbed my camera and just filmed. And I didn't have a film idea in the making. I was
Wow.
just like, okay, well, they're in my
That's what I was gonna
studio. I
ask.
should
Yeah.
document it. Yeah, it's just
Hmm.
what you do as a filmmaker. You just press record. And, that first day was interesting. The music was terrible, but there was something in those characters that was engaging. And so I kept following them, and I followed them through their whole kind of evolution and lifespan, and just happened to encapsulate a little sort of vignette of time in a sort of emerging democracy, a youth sort of movement that was kind of burgeoning in a new country, and it sort of captured a very special window in time that now doesn't exist, obviously with the change of government and the new powers that be.
Hmm.
That music scene has disappeared, and pretty much all the musicians have also had to leave the country. So it's now something of the past.
Wow. Now, is that a feature doc or a short?
Now it's a feature doc, 90 minutes exactly, depending on which version you
Okay.
watch, and it's out there on the channels and so forth. But I mean that came out in 2018, so it's had its life. Although it is
Hmm.
screening in Brazil at the Edit Film Festival this year, so
Oh,
it's
nice.
actually still getting film screenings at film festivals
Hmm.
4 years later. So it's got some sort of
Yeah,
place in history, I guess, which is good.
yeah, definitely. And what's the name of it again?
Rock Kabul, Rockabul, Rock Kabul.
Okay, definitely check that out. That sounds super
Yeah,
interesting.
good.
And I'm looking at
Google
your
that stuff.
pitch that you. Okay, yeah, definitely Google that. I'm looking at your pitch for the Film Fund, and I'm realizing this was
What
submitted in
did I write?
2019.
Yeah,
Do you want me to read it?
exactly. What did I write back in those
Okay.
days? Yeah, tell me what I say.
It was 2019. It was before COVID, before everything. It's crazy. This has been such a wild
Yeah.
ride. We still funded films through COVID and just put them on hold. But anyway, you wrote capture behind the scenes organization and the celebration of North Korea's 75th communist anniversary in October 2020, allowing our crew to return to Pyongyang with access already granted by DPRK. And then we just saw that and we are like,
Very
that's wild.
ambitious.
Like the audacity of someone to go into North Korea and like document their communist anniversary. I was thinking of that movie with like James Franco and I mean it's comedy obviously. Oh my god, what's the other guy's
Yeah,
name?
the interview.
Seth
Yeah, I
Rogen.
was
It's just
actually
like
watching it
the
recently.
interview.
It's quite a good film.
I have to
Yeah.
I have to watch it again, but it's just like this is nuts, and like and this is so cool. So there's so much conflict here with everything, in pop culture about North Korea. We hear about the secrecy and the we don't really know too much about what goes on there. So just to get a glimpse into that, and the fact that you already have access there, granted by DPRK, is that the government there?
Yeah,
I'm
so
very ignorant
the
when it comes to.
Democratic Republic of North Korea.
Okay, we had to look that one up, but that's what
Demo-
that's what I assumed just reading that.
DPR, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
the funding use there was capturing behind the scenes and allowing our crew to return. So very very interesting. We're obviously the funding went to allowing the crew to return there, the crew costs. So how did you come up with this idea? What sparked your interest in this project?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that when I got told about your website and this criteria of 2 sentences or whatever it was, 120 characters to get some money for a film, I just thought it was a joke. But clearly, it wasn't a joke because I threw it into the mix and I got the
Mm-hmm.
money. So it was a fantastic kind of initiative, and I really just didn't understand how easy it was and how brilliant that the model is.
Thank
And
you.
so I was actually on my yeah, no, full props to you for it. It's great. It's a great thing, and I'll get deeper into that later on when we talk about where we are now with the film. But for now, let's
Sure.
talk about trying to make the film.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in the process of touring the film Rockable. So it was going around the world, and I was sometimes invited to these film festivals to do the Q&As and all that kind of jazz. Great stuff, good fun. Um, and as we were going through these film festivals, I just went, I'm just going to start applying for some more film festivals and just see what we get, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can't lose, really. And I saw that there was a film festival in Pyongyang, the Pyongyang International Film Festival. And I'm like, what the hell? I'm going to apply just for, excuse my French, shits and giggles and see what happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And didn't hear anything for months. And all of a sudden, I get this email, this really weird, like Google Translate English email from Core Film. Now, Core Film is the Korean film company that is the only company that does film in North Korea. And they run not just the festival, but all collaborations between filmmakers outside the country and the government. And they are kind of the institution of all film. And they sent
Mm-hmm.
me an email saying, we would like you to come to our film festival. And I
Hmm.
was like, wow, that's great. I mean, I'm going to go screen my film in North Korea. How rock and roll can it get, right?
Right.
And so we had a whole bunch of emails back and forth. And every time I'm getting these emails, it's really Google Translate English. It's really bad. And I'm trying to sort of read between the lines because I know it's North Korea and you've
Mm-hmm.
got to be skeptical. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, look, the door's open. It could be possible. But, it was all very cryptic because you've got to understand there's also logistics involved of how to get to North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
visas and all this stuff, and it's not straightforward. And at one point, they told me, I think maybe the 10th email in, they're like, look, unfortunately, your film has been deselected from the film festival for whatever reasons it was.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the film was not deemed appropriate for North Korean standards, but we still want to invite you to the film festival. And that's when I
Interesting.
got really suspicious. I was
Yeah.
like, this is a bit weird now. You're not going to show my film, but you still want me to come as a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I asked my girlfriend and I asked my producer, and I said, what should I do? And they're like, well, do you feel like it's legitimate? I said, well, as legitimate as it gets from North Korea. And so I accepted the invitation, and in sort of a leap of faith, I bought a ticket to China because you have to go via China or Russia to get into North Korea. There's no direct flights from Australia. I don't know if there's many direct flights from anywhere to
Yeah.
North Korea. So I bought a ticket to China, and I got a Chinese visa. And then once you're in China, you apply for this North Korean visa. Now, I didn't tell the Australians that I was going to North Korea. I kept it all very hush hush. I didn't tell many people I was going to North Korea. I think about maybe 3 or 4 people knew I was going. I kept it quiet because I was a little bit sort of cautious that maybe someone would kind of track me. Anyway, so I got to Beijing and went to the North Korean embassy and knock on the door and go inside, and they knew exactly who I was. So like, yes, Mr. Beard, you're here.
Hmm.
Yes, you're going to the film festival. Sit down here, fill out this form, pay this amount of money, and come back tomorrow and pick up your visa. It was all very, very systematic and very straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
There was no questions. There was no sort of scrupulation of it all. Next day, came back, got my visa, bought my ticket, my plane ticket on North Korean Airlines, and that was it. I'm flying to North Korea.
It's wild.
No idea what to find, but I did have a camera.
They let you.
Had a
They let you
camera.
bring a
That was the
camera.
most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And well, yes, I mean, I had asked. I had a friend who worked for a tour company for North Korea,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd asked him what to expect. And he said, "Look, take a camera. Worst thing they can do is tell you not to film things. So you just take a camera. I'm a filmmaker. You can't not
Right.
take a camera, right?" So I arrive, and I'm part of this film festival junket, as we call it. And I think there was probably about 15, 16 other filmmakers there. All of them were showing their film. I was the only one who
Hmm.
wasn't showing my film. So I was like
That's
this
so weird.
third wheel, fourth wheel, fifth
Yeah.
wheel. It was really weird. I don't know why. Well, I don't know. Anyway, but the good thing was is because I wasn't showing the film and I wasn't having to do sort of press meetings and film screenings and Q&As, I was more free. So I had more time in my hands to film.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in North Korea, you don't have freedom. You have not one, but 2 guides or minders or guards or whatever you want to call them with you 24/7.
Wow.
Basically, they're wherever you go, besides your hotel room. But I presume my hotel room was bugged, so they're basically there anyway. So when you go outside of the hotel room, they meet you in the foyer. When you go to destination A, they go with you. When you go to the toilet while at destination A, they go to
Oh
the
my God.
toilet with you. They're just with you the whole time. And I think they have 2 of them so that one can have a
Okay.
break while the other one's with you, because it's quite
Yeah.
intense spending the whole day with someone. And I was there for 12 days. So 12 days with 2 people constantly every single day
Mm-hmm.
is quite an intense experience.
Did they pay for your
Um,
hotel?
but that's what got me to North Korea. Now, they did, so the whole thing was kind of
Yeah.
taken care of. There's only one hotel, one real hotel in North Korea that hosts
Okay.
all the foreigners. Now, those foreigners were part of the film junket, but there was also foreigners that were there as tour guides. They're on tours with different tour companies. So you'd see other foreigners passing in the foyer, and you'd see that some are Americans and some are from other countries, but you didn't really talk to them too much because most of the time your guides were sort of ushering you along to your next meeting or your next
Mm-hmm.
appointment and so stuff. So it was all very much ships in the night. But at night time, you could go for having a drink at the bar, and that's where you'd meet up with the other foreigners and you
Mm-hmm.
exchange stories and so forth. But being the sort of adventurous filmmaker I am by heart, I thought I could make a film in the 12 days I was
Hmm.
in North Korea. I had
Yeah.
the gumption, the sort of, the veracity to say, oh yeah, I'm gonna slam out a film in these
Hmm.
12 days for you guys. Come home, get it edited, smash it out, and enter into film festivals. Now I was
Hmm.
clearly wrong. I was very wrong, but I did film a lot. So it wasn't a lack of filming that I didn't have it, but the thing was I didn't capture was the film that I
Yeah.
thought I was going to get. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because the concept of the film I actually have for you is a concept about what it is to
Okay.
make films in North Korea. And this is the question that
Quick
we ask
sidebar.
in this film.
I know we funded the.
So, and
Oh, sorry. There's a little
I'm
delay
obviously,
there. I just wanted to ask before I forget the camera that we funded for you. Is that the camera you brought on the that trip that you were talking about?
hmm,
Okay.
yeah, I had two cameras. I had the camera which was the official big camera that was
Mm.
great for interviews, but I also took a second camera, which is one of these little DJI Osmo kind of
Uh huh.
gimbal
Okay.
4K handheld pocket things. And the great thing about it is
Yeah.
it's 4K. It looks great,
Right.
but it looks like a toy. And I saw other guys there with cameras, and they pull it out, and the North Koreans would go, "Oh, that's a bit big, and
Mm.
oh, it's a bit imposing, and you shouldn't be pointing that at this statue and that monument." And I pull out this little toy of a 4K DJI Osmo thing, and they thought I was just
Yeah.
like playing around, but I was also capturing
That's great.
really quite high quality footage. It's not production wise the best, but in a country like North Korea,
Hmm.
a fantastic camera to use. And for anyone out there listening who has a more sort of underground situation where they need to film something a little bit more low key, this camera
Cool.
is
Good to know.
fantastic for that, because it just
Hmm.
doesn't look like a real camera. So I was mixing up both cameras. When I was doing interviews, I was using my big camera, and when I was out in the field, which was most of the time where you get the
And the bigger
interesting
camera
stuff, I
was
was using the
the
smaller
Black
camera.
Magic.
Um, and so Yeah, which is a fantastic camera. I think it has the best interface of any camera I've ever used, because it just has the
Hmm.
buttons or the menu that you need to get the presets you want. And that's it. The negative of the Blackmagic is it has this
Hmm.
ridiculously huge file size. Even when you're in the sort of lowest of the ProRes kind
Yeah.
of 4K versions, it's still ridiculously high. So the unfortunate thing is your processing is heavy and your
Yeah.
storage is heavy. But
I love
besides
Black
that,
Magic too.
I
We
love the camera. It's just, when you press onto a menu in let's say Sony or
mhm.
Canon,
Yeah. Sorry. There's like a slight delay.
and you've got to
Yeah.
got to go into all these sub menus, and it just takes forever to find the thing you want. Blackmagic, you just go one, two, and you
Yeah,
find
we
it, and
have
bang, you fix
Expressway
the thing
Cinema
you want to
Rentals
fix. It's
sometimes
brilliant.
sponsors an equipment rental prize that includes a Blackmagic Ursa Mini G2, and then I have the actually over the pandemic we were doing this YouTube series called High Concept, and I was filming that on the original like 1080p version, the first Blackmagic Pocket, and it still worked fine. I mean, the production quality wasn't best; you can see it on YouTube. Literally, we just filmed in a little basement studio, but I love Blackmagic. It's so simple, it's easy to use, straightforward. And it just feels good in your hand too. Like the form, I haven't shot with the newer ones, like the 6K, which is I think. Did you shoot on this? Did
Yeah.
we fund the I don't remember. I know we did it over email. Was it the 6K?
Yeah, there's the 6K
Okay.
one. I mean, I bought the 6K one. I only shot in 4K because it was like, what am I going to do with
Right.
6K? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, what do you do with that?
Yeah. I was
But
on
anyway,
set the other
it's a
day, and the
fantastic
DP was
camera.
like, "Oh, are
And
we okay to shoot in 4K instead of 6K?" And I'm thinking like, what am I gonna do with 6K? Like, yeah, yes, 4K is fine.
yeah,
Well, that's awesome.
yeah. I mean, it's just, it's another world. But yeah, so I'm shooting away. I'm having a great time. Experiencing this new and almost sort of paralleled universe. I mean, the DPRK, or the North Korea, is like nowhere else in the world. And I've been to a lot of countries, and I've been to other what you might call communist countries, and it doesn't parallel. I mean, it's just another world. Now, saying that, I was on a film junket, and I was on what pretty much everyone else, whoever goes to the DPRK as a foreigner, experiences. You get put on a Ferris wheel or a merry-go-round, and you go around like this, and you get to see all the sights that you're meant to
Right.
see, the monuments meant to see. You get to see the kids doing the somersaults that are meant to be doing. You get to see the statues you're meant to see, and pay respects in the right way. And that's pretty much it. And I thought, being the sort of savvy, streetwise filmmaker I was, that I could find the other side of North Korea. And it doesn't
Hmm.
happen. I mean, it just, let's not kid anyone. If you try and do that, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And there was that one guy who stole the flag on the 14th floor of the same hotel I was
Wow.
staying in and was locked up for how
Yeah.
many of years, right? So for kids out there, just advise you, if you ever go to North Korea, just stick by the rules. It's
Yeah.
not worth the risk. Really, it's not. And so this is what our film actually came out, sort of evolved into be. So I am questioning basically the films that have been made for the last, let's say, 50 years in North Korea. Because the thing about North Korea is that they have their state-owned television that they feed out to the
Hmm.
world, right? And news agencies pick it up and then they report. North Korea is testing a missile, and we see North Korean footage. North Korea's had its first case of COVID, and we see North Korean footage. So besides that, the only other information we get from North Korea is from filmmakers, right? Who go in, and there's been some very good films made about North Korea, and I've learned pretty much all I
Hmm.
know about North Korea from those films. But what I question is now, since I've been to North Korea, is, are they actually documentaries? Because the definition of a documentary is an
Right.
objective
This is
view
clearly
of
through
a
a lens
situation,
that the
right?
government wants you to see.
But if your situation is totally controlled, and I mean 99.9% controlled by the government that is hosting you,
Hmm.
then it's not objective, right? Now, there is the occasional scene in an occasional film where they capture someone off guard doing something, right? And that's their one piece of gold that they go, oh, this is the proof that the North Koreans are doing X, Y, and Z. Now, I'm not saying they're not doing X, Y, and Z, but that one piece of gold is not
Hmm.
enough to call the rest of the film a documentary, right?
Yeah.
Because the rest of it was all set up for you. The people walked into the shop for you. The people said a script when they
Yep.
talked to you in that interview, and everything else was staged. And I guarantee you, it is. And so I started to, and when we got back to Australia, we started to question, well, what did we have in our hands? What was the footage we had? What was it actually really worth? Was it documentary worthy, or was it just a bunch of B-roll that everyone else had been picked up on the
Hmm.
last 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years of their experiences? And so what we've now, and it's kind of a little bit boring, but I think it's necessary.
Okay.
We've kind of turned this into an essay film where we actually talk about the theory of documentary making, which is very easy to do in America and Australia and the so-called West. But
Hmm.
what is
Why do you say that's
documentary
boring? That
making in
sounds
a
very
pure
interesting.
dictatorship? And it's a hard one.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't look, the visuals are fantastic. I got some really great shots. Um, but I mean, we have to
Okay.
explain it through, narration. That's why I say it's a little bit boring, because we don't capture this
Hmm.
in interviews. Now, we interviewed 3 filmmakers in the country who were there either filming a film, pitching
Right.
a film to Core Film, that company that runs all the industry, or people who were screening
Hmm.
films at the film festival. So people who are involved in North Korea. And we asked them these questions. How is it making a film in North Korea? So we have them
Hmm.
talking on camera, but they
Right. Right.
believe that
Right.
they're in the system, making a documentary or a feature film. So they're not going to answer that. So we kind of had to have these assumptions and these conclusions come out in the
Hmm.
in the sort of post production of it. And honestly, in my 12 days in North Korea, I really didn't know what was going on because I was inside
Hmm.
the wormhole, as we call it. And I sit in my hotel room every night with my camera doing, video diaries, trying to
While you were
figure
worried you
out
were
what
being
was
bugged
going
in the
on.
hotel, right?
At the
Yeah.
same time, I'm pretty sure they're listening in the microphone. Yeah, because there's a microphone in the lamp at the same time. So I'm trying to sort of, share my thoughts and also self censor, which was also
Right.
is not documentary, right? And so there's a whole sort of dissection that had to be sort of done in the post. So once I got back to Australia and I watched all the footage and I talked to my producer, I'm like, well, what do we have here? Um, so we got to that point and we had all this footage and we had the hard drives and we had the concept and we had a concept note and we did a rough, sort of concept trailer. And then I went to what we would consider the Australian film funding bodies. Now, I won't mention particularly who they are because I don't want to sort of shoot myself in the foot. But the way it works in Australia is you write a concept note, you fill out some forms, you submit your concept trailer, and if you're already in relationships with these people in these government film funding bodies, you can write to them personally and say, "Hey, Michael, here's my film idea. What do you think about this?" before I press submit on the actual form, right? So I wrote to Michael. That's not his real name. And I said, "Michael, I've got this idea. I just came back from North Korea. What do you think?" And he wrote back to me and said, "Let's meet tomorrow for coffee." And I was like, "Oh, great. Michael wants to talk more about the film." So we go for coffee, and he sits down. He's got this very straight face, and he says, "Travis, I deleted your email, and I need you to delete the email. I can't continue this conversation anymore. We
Oh,
can't
wow.
fund films about North Korea, and I cannot continue to discuss this anymore. Thank you." And that was it. I was like cut off. And it was a very nice way. He didn't do that in an aggressive way. It was just like, we just can't continue this conversation. The Australian government can't be seen funding films that question, A, North Korea, B, the Western representation of North Korea, and C, us funding that as a film. So I
Yeah.
kind of just got hit a brick wall. And this is where we get into the really kind of, if you want to talk about filmmaking and the nitty gritty, making films about North Korea, unless you already have the funding in place, is really difficult. Now, this all happened over the pandemic period. And I probably forgot to mention early on that I went to North Korea in September 2019. Now, we all know that the pandemic kind of started in October 2019. North Korea closed its borders in January 2020, right? So 3 months
Wow.
after I went there. North Korea still
Wow.
has not opened its borders to date. So we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about 2+ years, right? I couldn't go back to North Korea to document
Right.
that 75th anniversary that I
Yeah.
intended to, because the world was in lockdown. I couldn't get my film funded because the Australian government, person non grata, DPRK, North Korea, too hot to handle, go away. And so now I've been sitting on this little sort of, ticking time bomb since, let's say, the start of 2020. And I'm still trying to figure out how to finish it. I
Yeah.
have the film, I have a rough cut. I've made the rough cut. I've had a narrator come in and narrate this concept that I just shared with you. And it's about 12 minutes long. We could probably shave that down to 9 minutes to make it snappier. But I'm also having trouble
Right.
finding an editor that wants to work on it because I don't have the funding, because I can't get, a screen body that we would normally go to in Australia to put behind it. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of trying to now figure out an independent way to finish film. And luckily with today's software and sort of the technology, you can finish a film by yourself in a sense at home. I would love to do it properly. I would love to put the full post-production, you know, power behind this
Yeah.
film and give it what it deserves, but I just don't have the funding to do it. And so it's a bit of an unfortunate thing, but I will find a way and I will finish this film. I just haven't got there yet. And I strongly believe that this question needs to be asked, because the other thing about filmmakers, all us documentary filmmakers, we actually have a lot of power in our hand to change public opinion, whatever the subject matter be. But with North Korea, it's even more powerful because there's not a lot of information. And the only information we get is from their own news feed, which we know is tainted by their own policy. So if we don't start asking the hard questions in these documentaries, instead of just following the junket or the tour wagon that they take us
Yeah.
on, then we're going to keep
No, I think it's an
producing
important
the
story you're
same
telling.
narrative about North Korea. I'm not pro-North Korean. I'm not anti-North Korean. I think we just need to ask deeper questions rather than just go, "Hey, I went to North Korea.
Yeah.
It was really
And
good. It
we
was
were
really
super happy
bad,"
to
and
fund
I press
the
record.
equipment to get you the footage you needed. Hopefully we can figure out how to get it across the finish line soon. But yeah, I mean it's definitely, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, no, I'm just saying that. I mean, it's one of those things where you you want to finish the film,
Mm-hmm.
you want to do it justice because you've spent so much time on it, but at the same time, you don't want to just rush it out there for the sake of it. Because I could probably cut that rough cut into 9 minutes and put it into a film
Mm-hmm.
festival, and it'd get picked up just because it's North Korea. Because honestly, nothing's come out of North Korea for the last 2 years. But I think the film deserves a bit more
Mm-hmm.
time and a little bit more attention to detail in the post production. So I'm going to try my best to get
It's
it
all
done
good.
by the end of this year. I promise, Thomas. I'm going to give you something to add to your collection.
Yep.
I'm not going to. We'll get
Yeah.
there. It's just a matter of finding that right
Totally makes
platform
sense.
to sort of launch it
Yeah,
off.
we just we're excited to see what you've got, and we can't wait to share it once it gets finished. So best of luck finishing it, getting it across the finish line. Now, just talking about your career again, I mean, we could talk about the North Korean film all day,
Thank you.
which I would love to do maybe another time. But just in terms of your career, do you are you a
Mm.
full time filmmaker? Is this your main job?
Well, yeah. I mean, I call my partner the
And
patron
the
of the.
music too.
Yeah, my partner is a patron of the arts. She
Okay.
she works very hard to
Okay.
make it so I can actually have an artistic career where I don't have another job. We also have a child, so I'm a daddy
Gotcha.
daycare father looking after the child. But I mean,
Hmm.
it is my only job, and as an independent filmmaker, um, the service that you provide. This is why I wanted to come back to this, as I said early on. When I went to these film bodies that I already have relationships with, and said I've got a film about North Korea, they went. I also have another film about Afghanistan, and they can fund that because Afghanistan's not as sort of as risque.
Not
But
as
your
a
film
hot topic.
fund,
Yeah.
your film fund is key and essential for people like me that have these kind of more, let's say, off the cuff and not so mainstream ideas. And these little seed funds that you can give can actually make these films come to life. And I think it's really important. And
Hmm.
I strongly believe in what you've created, and I actually don't understand why it didn't happen earlier, and it's not happening in more places in the world because it's a brilliant idea. The amount of paperwork, red tape, and bureaucracy involved in getting even small amounts of funding from our government bodies is phenomenal. Whereas you have a system where you just
Hmm.
need to come up with two great sentences for an idea for a film, and you
One
give it
sentence.
one sentence, yeah, one good sentence, you give a significant
One
amount
good
of money.
sentence.
I think it's fantastic, and I strongly advocate for people to keep submitting to your platform because I think there should be more initiatives like that and less initiatives where we have these elongated processes because it's not just about
Hmm.
getting the funding from the filming body. You also have to tick boxes throughout the funding process to get your funding released.
Yep.
And it's quite a process. Whereas with you guys, it was here's your
Yeah.
money, go and make your film, and let's do a podcast in 6 months. And I think that's fantastic. But
Thank
in
you.
my
Thank you,
case,
Travis,
it
for the
was
kind words.
actually
And you're preaching to the
two and a
choir
half
here.
years.
Yeah, it's okay. COVID, we can make some exceptions because of COVID and North Korea. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I was
yeah.
going through that red tape. I submitted to a grant, or applied to a grant at my college, and I was actually first. I went through this really long. If you listen to the podcast or you read the blog posts or read the copy on the website, it sucks like going through those grant applications. It's awesome that grants exist and they make this funding available, but the process of getting it can be so convoluted. Like I made a 20-page grant application for this school grant, met with a grant committee. They said, this is looking really good. I'm not supposed to tell you this really, but you're likely going to get this grant. I was like, oh my god, that's awesome, and I didn't get it after spending like so many hours on that application, meeting with the committee. I didn't get it, and then I actually received another grant from the school that like a professor recommended me for, and I got that one. I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, I didn't get the other one, but I got this one. I can make my film now. And like you were saying, even when you get that funding, there's so many boxes you have to check. They wanted um, every person on the crew to like sign an agreement with the school because the
Yeah.
funding was going through the school, and it was just there was so much red tape involved. I was like, is this even worth it at the time? So I ended up going with other funding for that project, but it's just so convoluted. So the process of trying to raise funding for a short film in particular too is just like no one wants to fund shorts really because they don't make money at the end of the day. Um, and
Exactly.
but they're important. So that's why I came up with this. I was in school. I was in an entrepreneurship course. I was like, all right, I need to come up with an idea for a company. I'm trying to fund a film, but I try to make the process of funding films easier, and that's where it all came from. So I appreciate that you find value in that idea. It really means a lot to me.
Well, I mean, look, I'm proof in the
So
pudding. I
with
mean, I would not
yeah,
have been able to make this film without that fund. And yeah, I mean, going to North Korea is certainly an appealing pitch, but you still need the tools, and the tools cost money, and so it works. It
mhm,
worked out very well.
yeah, and we're happy to do so. It's so excited. I'm gonna hold you to the end of the year to see it. Um, what
Yeah, I just got to
my
find an
next
editor.
question on the list is yeah
Yeah.
we yeah um, my next question on the list is what are some of the major challenges of making a film in North Korea? But we already went through that. So we could talk about that all day, I'm sure. But my next question is,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on film festivals? I know you said you have some experience, touring um, the previous doc, globally. Could you talk about that experience a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think importantly, there's what I did with my previous film in 2018, and there's now. Because when I was screening that film, it's pre-pandemic, and the film industry, particularly film festivals, was the model that it's been for many years. It's been the sort of showcase of what's going to be hot for that year, and it's a great way to get your films out there to the platforms and to the audience. But now it's changed. Now with the COVID, the lockdown, the pandemic, and the obviously streaming platforms that have taken over the world, film festivals don't have the gravitas and the sort of punch that they had back in the day. And I know that they're doing their best to still be the showcase, but they're just not able to because of so many logistical parameters involved. And so I'm not saying that people shouldn't be in film festivals, but the idea, like when I screened my first film, I think I went to maybe 12 or 13 film festivals in Europe, America, and Asia. And there
Hmm.
was even some red carpets and black carpets in there. It was quite fancy and fun. And I just don't see that sort of experience being so easy now as it was
Hmm.
back then. Just because of logistics of travel is harder.
Hmm.
And film festivals, a lot of them are doing online, or they have done online for the last couple of years because of the lockdown. And so it's hard. It's really hard. Film festivals are always going to be competitive, but I think they're going to be even more competitive now. But they are an amazing experience in regards to showcasing your film, meeting the audience, but also meeting fellow filmmakers. And I think that's the best bit.
Hmm.
You're out there and you're at a film festival, and I was in South Korea, and I was at a fantasy film festival. I don't know how my film about extreme metal in Afghanistan got into a fantasy film festival, but it did. And you don't ask questions. You just go, "Oh,
Yeah.
cool, I'm going,"
Did you seek
and
that
they
out,
fly
or
you
did they
over and they
contact
put
you?
you up and all that. And that's great. No, they contacted me. It's just
That's
like,
so
okay,
weird.
cool. You want my film? Take it.
Yeah.
But the cool thing was, the one guy that I created a friendship there with was a guy who made a film about a Christmas apocalypse zombie film. So nothing to do with what my film was about,
Yeah.
but we connected and became friends. And I went and saw his film where Santa Claus was a zombie, eating brains, and he went and saw my film about some dudes rocking out in a Muslim country
Yeah.
under terrorist attacks and suicide bombs. So like those two worlds kind of intersected, and I think that's the
Yeah.
beauty of film festivals, that you get to meet different people, and you get to see a lot of cool films.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about the life and the longevity of film festivals in the future. Of course, the big ones, the Tribecas, the Sundances, the IDFAs and the Sheffields and all these kind of big documentary films, they'll survive, but it's the small ones and the medium-sized ones. Are they going to be able to compete with the Netflix and these other big platforms that are now just basically going from release onto platform,
Yeah,
and the cinema, that little sort of pit in the middle, is a lot of time being bypassed, which is
it
really
is.
sad.
Yeah, it is sad.
And so that'll be an interesting thing to watch in the coming future, how we sort of navigate that process.
Yeah, and I like to believe, I don't have any data off the top of my head to back this up, but I like to believe there are enough people out there who enjoy the experience of going to the cinema, the experience of going to a film festival, meeting the filmmakers, even just seeing the films on the big screen. Unless you have a very nice house
Yeah,
and home theater with a projection set up, there's nothing really quite like it with the surround sound and just that experience of being in the theater. I think there are enough people out there. At least I want to believe there are enough people
yeah,
out there that will survive going forward. But it's really interesting because you're talking about it's film is such an interesting. I mean, I guess every art form is commercialized, but film is so integrated with um, business. Really, it's the movie business. So, but you're looking at it really as the evolution of an art form. You're not projecting the film anymore. It's now being consumed in a different kind of medium. And I think that's interesting in itself. But um, we're getting off on a tangent here, a little more theoretical than I usually get. But film festivals,
it's fine. I mean,
great experience. I definitely recommend them. So you can learn a lot too. You could have some interesting panels there and people speaking about their experiences. I mean, when I was coming up with the idea for the film fund and doing research on it, I went to film festivals and would just talk to the filmmakers, like, hey, like, what were some of the problems you encountered when you were trying to get funding for this, or how did you fund it? How did people even fund short films? So I learned so much, and I always, even if you're not in the film festival, you can still go to them as an audience member. Just check them out. It's a great experience. If you had advice for our community of filmmakers, what would
yeah.
you say? Whether it's film festival related or just filmmaking in general.
I mean, the current film I'm making now about Afghanistan came from my Q&As when I was doing the last film, because people asked me, like, you had this band, you gave them instruments, you mentored them, you gave them a studio, you put them on stage. It kind of looks like you created the band.
Hmm.
And it's a very good question. So was it really a documentary, or did you manifest this into a story? And that's what my now film is about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm questioning the role the West had in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. Now that the Taliban has taken control, we have to question our role as so-called nation
Mm-hmm.
builders. And this is what it's all about: questioning. We have to question. And not just question your character or your politician, but also question yourself, because you yourself are part of that process. You are part of the equation, your eye, your ear, your brain, when you enter that room. I always use documentary
Mm-hmm.
as my example because that's the world I live in. So when I was in North Korea or when I was in Afghanistan, as soon as you walk in a room and you turn that
Wow.
camera on, everything changes. It
Mm-hmm.
just that's the way humans are. Unless you have a hidden camera or a very small camera like the camera I used in North Korea, a lot of the time the camera actually changes the results. And so you really have to question, what is my sort of perspective and my position in this scenario, this environment. Now, if you get to know your characters well enough, if you spend enough time with your characters, then they relax and they don't
Mm-hmm.
mind having that camera around, and they'll be more candid. And that's obviously an easy sort of not easy, but a trick that you can use to get the verite, to get the veracity of a scene.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the time we don't have that option. We just come in and we're, oh, something's happening, press record, capture it, and that. So there's an art to learning how to be in an
Mm-hmm.
environment as a filmmaker. And that's what you
Yeah.
don't really learn in the
Mm-hmm.
university. You learn that from making films. You got to be there, and your posture and the way you hold the camera, or the way you're interacting just with your eye contact with that character while your camera is down at a lower height, around your hip, whatever it is, that is really
Mm-hmm.
important to get that successful shot that you're looking for. You don't get that all the time. Maybe you've got a really good tutor or lecturer in your university, but most of the time they're reading
Mm-hmm.
from a book or from, a screen. And it's only when you're actually out in the field and you're using that camera and you're trying to break that barrier between, the politeness of I've got a camera and you're in front of the lens, to an engagement where your audience has, sorry, not your audience, your character has forgotten the camera's there, and there's a direct connection between you and that character.
Yeah.
That's when you get the gold, and that's when you get what makes a really good film. And that's why when I was in North Korea, I had this tiny camera. I kept it down low, so down here on my hip, and I would converse, or I would try and capture what I thought was real life. And obviously, we've already talked about, what I was seeing. But instead of holding the camera up high or sticking it in someone's face when I was trying to film, I hoped that I would get something a bit more real. Now, obviously, what is real and what is not real in North Korea is another whole discussion. But this is just my little bit of advice for
Yeah, I think that's super helpful, and I love that you're a self-taught filmmaker, especially on the documentary side of the industry too, because a lot of, all of my experience, really, I've done interviews and corporate, productions and things like that, but most of my experience is narrative. So, getting advice from someone who is an experienced documentary filmmaker, especially a self-taught one, is just invaluable. And I think the lesson of connecting with your subject, with your character, on a real level, like you said, how real can you get in North Korea, but on a real level, is just super important. And that's maybe something you wouldn't learn in film school. Because I imagine, unless you're in a program that's specifically geared toward documentary filmmaking, they're going to be, more on the technical side of things, maybe more on the film theory side of things. You're not going to get that kind of person-to-person interaction all the time, and unless you're making a real documentary. So I think that's a super awesome bit of advice you gave. Thank you. And my next question is a complete plug for the Film Fund that we usually do. We're going to skip it because you already said what you love about the Film Fund and how simple it is. So thank you so much for those kind words. we're not going to beat it to death. What is next for you? You said you're finishing the North Korean film. Also, do you have a title for it you'd be comfortable releasing, or are you holding on that?
Yeah, so the North Korean film is called Grandeur in Isolation.
Okay. Cool. Grandeur, Juror.
So you got the grandeur of yes, the
Okay.
grandeur as in like the grandeur of how North Korea sees itself in a very isolated existence.
Gotcha. I love that.
But besides that, I'm making my second film about Afghanistan, which is called The Watch All the Time. And there is a website you can go to, thewatchallthetime.com. And we have funding for this one, so we are in post-production.
There you go.
And there you go. See, sometimes you can get it right. And we are now finishing this film. We shot this film in March this year, but also we shot it over the last 7 years of living in Afghanistan.
Oh, wow.
And basically this film, we questioned the role of the West in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, this so-called nation building, what it was, and, was it worth it? Because now the Taliban are back in control. So we're really questioning the model of what the West does when they go into these countries and try to employ democracy and create these new civil societies. I don't have the answers, but I have 7 really good characters that we have on camera.
And you're asking the questions
that tell us their perspective. And yeah. So the good thing is, and it goes back to my previous point, I know all these characters because I knew them all from Afghanistan. So I had the relationship. So when I walked into the room and did these interviews, I didn't have to get to know them.
Right.
We already knew each other. There was hugs when we first met, and we went straight into the questions. And some of these questions are quite hard because we're asking ourselves, what were we doing there? What was the point? We spent $1.9 trillion. 3,000 American lives were lost. 300,000 Afghan lives were lost. Wow. What were we thinking? And so it's a pretty hard-hitting, dry bunch of questions. And my cohort, as we call them, and the cohort's very varying. We have Westerners, we have Afghans, we have people that lived in Afghanistan, we have people that still live in Afghanistan, we have diplomats, we have Taliban, we have artists, we have journalists, we have a whole array of people that give their perspective on the last 20 years. And I hope that we're going to push society to question will we do this again? Obviously, we all know what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, and when that war gets to a point where it's possible for the aid workers to go in and rebuild, will we make the same mistakes we did in Afghanistan, or will we do it differently? And this is what this film will hopefully help them for their next venture, because we can't just keep building these nations and letting them collapse again. It's not helping the world. And so, a bit like North Korea, it's a bit of a thinking piece.
No, that sounds super
But,
awesome. Everybody
yeah,
check that out. And then we are coming up on time. Got to keep this under an hour for Instagram. But Travis, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it, especially with the time difference. I know it's kind of the middle of the night there, so I definitely appreciate it. Do you have social media channels on which we can follow you?
All good. Thank you. Yeah, check out Not Before 12, so NOTB412. So that's on Instagram, that's on Facebook, and
Cool.
Somewhere else, I don't know. There's also a website, notbefore12.com, and that's where you'll see all my film stuff.
Okay, sweet. We'll link to...
Oh, and my music.
Oh yeah, check out your music. We didn't talk about your music at all. We might have to get you on the show again. You have so much going on. Thank you so much for coming again, everybody. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I'm going to try to wrap this up in the last 2 minutes we have. Check out our summer narrative and documentary contest. By the time this gets posted, I've been super slow. We're posting about once a month, but they may be open, they may be closed. Check the website for the most up-to-date information, thefilmfund.co. We have some amazing funding and sponsors there. Check out our blog.thefilmfund.co for filmmaking and producing tips. Sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter is really the best way to get our updates, as well as social media. We're at the Film Fund on Instagram, facebook.com/filmfundco. Twitter is at Simply Film Fund, and then LinkedIn is the plain old The Film Fund if you want to get your corporate networking on. And if you hear some interesting music in the background, that is my cell phone, so I'm going to go. We have an ebook too on the resources page. Check that out. Guide to pre-production, all these plugs. Okay, we're done. Travis, thank you so much again. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Is there anything else you want to add?
Keep making films. Keep asking questions.
Awesome. Keep asking questions, everybody. And tune in every Friday. Well, not every Friday, but some Fridays once a month when we put these episodes. Talk to everyone soon. Thanks.